Jobs have been lost, industries have halted the production lines, businesses have gone bust, and economies are crashing at a rate not seen on a scale this big for a century. 2008 saw the last global crisis, but it wasn't this big, and it was induced solely by the actions of one sector, namely the banking industry. Today, we are seeing a whole new game, a crash caused by a virus.
It will, morally, it will totally demoralise the family. It'll be very difficult to pick up the pieces again. We could probably start up in a small way, nowhere on the size and the volume that we have up to date. And it would mean just growing the business from scratch.
The impact has swept across the globe in a wave format from east to west. And Europe is apparently at this point the center of it. It has faced some tragic consequences, from loss of life to businesses leaving people turning to the state for sustenance.
The loans offered by the government won't help at all, because although there will be no interest payable for 1 year, we won't start making any money until next May or June. So we're going to chase our tails. We just can't catch up, even with government loans.
Definitely hard times ahead. Hello and welcome to Economic Divide with me, Kavita Fai. In this special two-part edition of the show, we will be taking a look at the concept of the world falling into a new Great Depression, starting first with Europe. So sit right back, enjoy the show, grab a pen and paper or your phone to write down what's coming up. First up, throughout the show, we would like to prompt you to interact with us via our Twitter marker, @ED_program, and send us your stories from around the world as to just how the COVID-19 virus has impacted your daily lives. We will read some out on the next show. Well, there's no doubt that the world is heading for tough economic times ahead, with many words being floated about, from a recession to a depression. So what exactly is the difference between the two? Well, taking a look at a recession, that is when a country sees 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth to hit its economy, namely a 6-month negative growth rate. Some countries have experienced that, and they actually come out of that, but this is different. This is definitely looking much different than the 2008 financial crisis, for example. Now, depression, however, is measured in years, and if, like the Great Depression in 1929, could last as long as a decade. Well, the Eurozone, which is essentially the EU trading zone, is predicted to see a 11.4% drop in its GDP in the second quarter of 2020, according to figures released in Germany. Put into numbers, the EU's current GDP is around 19 trillion euros. An 11.4% contraction would equate to 2.166 trillion euros. The GDP of the US is equivalent to the EU, or thereabouts, at $19.5 trillion, but the loss that the EU sets out to lose is a shocking figure, and is in fact equivalent or more to the entire GDPs of, for example, Brazil, Italy, Russia, and South Korea, or even more startling, as much as the GDPs of Austria, Norway, the UAE, and Nigeria combined. Now, the country in particular that is the weakest link in the EU is Italy. It already has seen 4 recessions in the last decade. The UK, now no longer part of the EU, is also in a huge economic downturn, with the retail and production industry also seeing recessions to hit hard where it hurts the most, namely on the people.
One of the main pioneers and fundamental pillars of the European Union, and one of the most important EU economies, is that of France. With the second largest economy in the EU after Germany, France has seen its economy suffer as much as any other EU nation due to the outbreak of COVID-19 taking its toll, not only on the people of France, but on the wheels that turn its economy. France is a particularly sensitive nation when it comes to the economy. Most state-run operations employ staff on a permanent basis in what the French call fonctionnaires, and their jobs are relatively safe and also backed by the government. However, France also has a booming private sector, with the production of vehicles being a major employer in France, with the likes of Peugeot, Citroën and Renault all being large multinational companies that, due to the virus, have seen their production lines come to a grinding halt. Furthermore, tourism is also a key factor in the French economy, with Paris alone being the most visited city in the world, and raking in billions of euros from multiple other sources of income. Finally, food is a huge part of the French economy, with cafes, bars and restaurants all seeing their staff on furlough and not earning money. They're also joined by the French agricultural workers and farmers, who have seen their produce reduced in output. So what are the chances of the French economy slipping into recession? Clearly, based on the French system alone, the chances are high. However, the French, much like the rest of the world, may not feel the immediate impact on their economy for now, and will likely become more apparent in the second quarter of the year. And any loss of production now will not be felt until later. And the recovery time, once a recession does set in, will lead to a long period of recovery, not just for France, but for the whole world, according to French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire.
Just as economic growth was global yesterday, the economic crisis will be global tomorrow. And this crisis will be long.
At these early stages of the recession and potential depression, the EU is trying their best to avoid nations going into these negative economic downturns. Yet the inevitable is going to happen. The EU has already adopted a financial stimulus package of 2% of the nation's GDP, which would roughly equal to around 240 billion euros. The EU has also looked at providing 13% liquidity into states, with the money coming from pre-financing from the European Regional Development Fund, the European Social Fund also, and the European Cohesion Fund, along with the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund. This will all total 37 billion euros. The European Central Bank, or the ECB, has also acted in trying to avoid the depression by maintaining cheap long-term loans to EU member states, and has also bought, from what we have, 120 billion euros worth of bonds, intended for immediate injection back into European markets. Outside of the EU, the UK's Bank of England also used the crisis to cut its central bank interest rates to 0.1%. It has also added £200 billion to its asset purchase program, something that follows loosely in line with the EU and US central banking actions.
We're now going to turn our focus to Britain. The ex-European Union member is likely going to be the largest sculptor for when it comes to the economic fallout caused by the COVID-19 outbreak. Not only is the UK seeing colossal losses of life and infection rates across the nation as the virus spreads, and brings an ever-testing time on the already frail and collapsing NHS, but it also has the seemingly forgotten crisis of Brexit still to deal with. The UK retail industry, which employs some 3 million people, is one of the largest hit sectors of the British economy, with stores that have over a century's retail legacy starting collapsing due to Brexit. And now with COVID-19 taking its toll, today we see the likes of Debenhams and New Look also going to administration, blaming COVID-19 for its downfall and pulling the wool over the eyes of the British, who refuse to accept that Brexit has killed the UK and use the coronavirus as a convenient scapegoat.
You can clearly see in all the data that this is a major coronavirus effect because of the government response, which is to close down virtually the entire economy apart from essential services. So you can't really blame it on Brexit at all. But of course, if we were to follow this with a hard Brexit as currently planned, then that would be really dangerous for the UK economy.
Now, it's true that the UK government have attempted to reassure people that it will step in to help its workers who have now been laid off or are out of work by giving both employed and self-employed personnel up to 80% of their salaries.
We're covering the same amount of income for a self-employed person as we are for furloughed employees, who also receive a grant worth 80%.
But will the UK government from now on be forever in debt due to the money that they're paying out? And how on earth will they recover as an economy now that they've left the EU and there are still no trade deals in place?
Our calculations show that if you take into account both tariffs and non-tariff measures, in other words, a hard Brexit, the impact for the UK will be a loss of 14% of their overall exports to the EU, which constitutes about 32 billion US.
With the UK unable to deal with the COVID-19 outbreak as they would have wanted to, with medicines from Europe drying up, racial discrimination against European on the rise, and the fact that the economy is in a state of collapse, it's no wonder that many people are jumping the sinking ship that is the United Kingdom, as depression is clearly on the cards over recession.
Mon Abedin, our current affairs and impact analyst, joins us now to tell us more about the issue that we have at hand. Obviously, this is a very big topic.
Absolutely.
Tell us about the first tweet that you have for us.
Okay, well, the first tweet, not surprisingly, relating to the situation with the UK and the EU, if it comes up. Oh, there we go. So basically saying, why on earth did the UK leave the EU? Now is a good time to come back. The fact that the COVID-19 is going to bring economic devastation in its wake. So clearly a pro-EU position. But to be honest with you, if you look at the situation in the EU right now, the disunity, the fact that the Germans and the Dutch are refusing to help the Italians and the Spanish, because the Italians and the Spanish have asked for a special bond to pool the debt, fiscal bailout.
That's not going to happen though, is it?
Well, exactly. But anyway, this is a pro-EU sentiment. But the fact is, the UK is not going to go back to the EU.
The UK is thinking twice about why it left the EU, because obviously...
I don't think so. I think the Brexiteers in the UK, they are...
Are they adhering to the EU standards right now, or rules?
Well, the UK formally left the European Union on the 31st of January.
Okay.
They have a year to secure a trade deal with the EU until the 31st of December 2020.
Okay.
If they don't do that, they'll just crash out, and they have to deal with the EU on WTO terms and conditions.
All right. Very well. Let's go to the next tweet that you got for us here.
Okay, so again, more or less on the same theme. World economic depression on its way. Begin in Europe. Most of EU giants, Germany, France, Italy, have been hit badly. Well, actually, I agree more with this tweet because EU has been hit very bad. Angela Merkel came out and said, very explicitly, this is the EU's biggest challenge since its foundation in 1957. So absolutely right.
But there can't be the same thing for all. I mean, you can't apply that same recession. Perhaps Germany's not going to experience it. Italy looks like it will. It's the most highly indebted country
well,
in the
we're talking about a pan-European phenomenon. I think the EU as a whole is in serious trouble. Richer nations, the ones who are economically more resilient, the Germans and the Dutch, they can help, but they're not going to help.
They don't want the Eurobonds either.
Exactly. They've said we're not going to do it, and that's really angered the Italians. The Italians, they've reached out to the Chinese to help them. Really? Okay? So this shows you how bad the situation is. So it's just not an economic issue, it's also a political one.
Okay, let's go on to the next tweet on this.
Okay, well, this is very similar to the first tweet that we had. Brexit is dead, it's been killed off by COVID-19. Again, I'm not so sure. I think as far as the UK Brexiteers are concerned, it's Brexit or die. The fact that this virus has come along is neither here nor there. It's going to make it much more painful for them because obviously Brexit had huge economic consequences, and COVID-19, the coronavirus, is going to compound those problems. But I don't agree with that. Brexit is not dead. The Brits have followed through with that. They're going to do Brexit or die, basically. So
uncharted territory, obviously, for the UK and pretty much the entire world. All right, wish we had more time. We'll do that on part 2, though.
Okay.
But thank you very much, Mahan.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Appreciate it, Mahan Abedin there, who gave us some insight here. Well, now, as mentioned earlier, I want to invite you, the viewers, to let us know what your thoughts are on the potential of the EU falling into a recession and a possible depression. These are the 2 questions that we have for you. First, how has the COVID-19 affected you and your business? That's the first question. Then the next question is, has your government helped you out, or have you had to sort out your own problems? Please go to our Twitter page, @ED_program, and answer one or both of the questions. We would really appreciate it. Okay, we're about to take a quick break here on Economic Divide, but don't go away because we have a lot more coming up on the show. We're going to take a look into how COVID-19 has struck particularly hard in Italy. And following that, we head over to the Iberian Peninsula and assess the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the Spanish economy. We're also joined by Professor Mark Kaysen from the University of Reading, as he compares the current financial situation to that of the Great Depression of the 1920s. So grab yourselves a quick refreshment. We'll be back in no time at all. Welcome back to Economic Divide with me, Kaveh Tafway, where this week on the show we are examining whether the COVID-19 pandemic will lead to another global recession or, worse still, a Great Depression. Joining me in the studio today is Mark Kaysen, Director of the Center for Institutions and Economic History at the University of Reading in the UK. Professor Kaysen has been teaching economics since the late 1960s and holds membership in a variety of economic and academic institutions. Professor, thanks for joining us. To start off with, comparing the current economic crisis to the Great Depression of the 1920s, are we seeing similar traits there? For example, crashes in the stock market, multiple workers losing their jobs, or have times changed? And are we able to adapt better in the modern era to this?
Well, I think the symptoms of high unemployment and financial turbulence are similar. But I think there's one fundamental difference, that the causes are different. In the Great Crash 1929, the stock market crashed and then the economy got into difficulty. Here we have a virus that's putting the economy into difficulty, and then the stock market is responding to that by falling. So I think we need to realise with different causes, we need different policy responses. And in the 1929, the response was to spend more to get business back up on its feet. But spending more at the moment isn't going to do any good if business can't operate properly because of social distancing.
Well, Professor, many nations are actually pumping billions, if not trillions of dollars to save their economies. So the question has to be raised whether that's truly enough and what the consequences will be to the taxpayers and central reserves in the future. If and when will these subsidies actually pay out?
I think the idea of pumping, billions and trillions of money into the system is almost like a gut reaction on the assumption that things are like the Great Depression. I mean, my analogy would be to the Black Death of 1348, which disrupted the entire economy. And the response there was actually charity. What happened was that people in positions of authority stepped in to help those who were in vulnerable positions. And after that help had been given, then society did its best to come together afterwards to sort matters out. So I don't really think, for example, the government ideas you see in several countries of giving loans to business, there's no asset against which the businesses can borrow. They're just saddling themselves with debt that they probably won't be able to repay when the crisis is over.
And finally, do you think that countries are actually going to survive this? Or does this mean that globalization perhaps has failed altogether since we're all in it together?
Well, I certainly think we're all in it together and no one is going to get away scot-free. Globalization is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in the sense that it gives us access to resources outside our own country. So if our own country is paralyzed, we can get resources elsewhere. The downside of it is that many of our global supply chains are very fragile, and one factory getting into difficulty in one country can disrupt an entire chain globally.
Professor Casson there from the University of Reading, who gave us his thoughts on this. Well, coming up next, we're going to take a look at the situation with Italy. We have said that Italy is the weakest link in the EU, one of the highest indebted countries of the EU. Figures show the staggering $2.3 trillion. How can Italy survive this pandemic is the big question.
It was previously described as the weakest link in the European economy, with the Italian nation seeing 4 recessions in the last decade alone. Yet for some reason, in spite of multiple assistance packages from the EU, the Italians have always managed to scrape their way out of economic hardship and continue to see the economy performing with peaks and troughs. The ability to react to the downs comes from a strong industrial output from the north of the country, which sees factories producing a host of products, allowing the Italians to become world-renowned in certain industries, from the coffee and espresso machines of Milan to the supercars of Ferrari and Maserati, and the staple Fiat and Alfa Romeo, all playing their part in the economy. Tourism also plays a huge part in the Italian economy, with the historic sites of Rome to the canals of Venice, all bringing in the tourist, and all of which under normal circumstances bring in billions of euros from the trades associated with tourism. Milan, as well as being the industrial hub of Italy, is also home to one of the world's largest fashion hubs, which in itself contributes vastly to the economy. The fact that this macro and multinational form of economy exists in Italy means that recession is likely to follow rather than depression, as the outlook is gloomy for all nations, but the model in which they are going forward seems to be the solution that the EU are relying on.
First and foremost, we must act at the macroeconomic level. And to be very clear from my part too, we will use all the tools at our disposal to make sure that the European economy weathers this storm.
As mentioned, the Italians have recovered in the past, yet the legacy of previous recessions still lives on, with the national debt of the Italians still greater than other EU countries, such as Germany. So will the EU come together and save each other? According to some, Germany may yet be the saviour of all, as the EU's largest economy, although the deals are still being thrashed out in the corridors of Brussels.
Now, can the Germans help finance new bonds to help out the Italians and the Spanish and other adversely affected economies is a big question. But I think ultimately it will be in the Germans' interest.
The EU as a supranational entity is both a magnificent achievement and also an entity that has to pass a tough test ahead because, as history has shown us, it almost failed in the past in the way that it dealt with the 2008 financial crisis. Its terrible handling of the previous recession saw the bloc almost collapse as Greece, Ireland, Italy, Portugal and Spain all needing the EU to bail them out. And with the consequences of this, almost saw the end of the euro as a single EU-wide currency. The question that arises now is whether the EU can learn from past mistakes and use the experience of where they went wrong last time to act in accordance to prevent the same from happening again. As the US also deals with the outbreak and their own economic crisis caused by the COVID-19, they will secretly have one eye on Europe, who, let's face it, the US sees as a direct global economic competitor and hopes that the bloc does collapse, leaving the US as the dominant Western Hemisphere economic power. However, the EU have shown in the past that they can scrape through the tough times, and with the notion that Europe is stronger together, it seems that the envy of the US may go to waste. Now, let's take a look at one of Europe's countries that has been the weakest link in the EU economic chain, yet surprisingly has a strong industrial economy that somehow manages to keep it going, of course. Who am I talking about? Which country? I'm talking about Italy.
The Spanish, like the Italians, have very similar economies, with both tourism and agriculture playing a large part in the way their economies survive. The Spanish, unlike the Italians, do not have a large industrial output, but make up for it in the tourism market, and of course fresh produce, with the Iberian Peninsula being described as the Garden of Europe. Much like Italy, however, the impact of the COVID-19 virus has caused many deaths and huge rates of infection across the country, leaving popular cities in Spain ghost towns as tourism dries up, restaurants close, and the footfall of people usually crowding the streets becomes almost non-existent. As with Italy, Spain has also relied on bailouts from the EU in the past, and have again seemed to ease themselves out of financial trouble by relying on tourism and food production. Yet, with the summer season still upon us, the impact for the Spanish economy may still not yet be felt until after the third quarter of the financial year, when the true results of the loss to business takes its full effect on the Spanish economy and will certainly lead it to recession. Furthermore, with the Spanish producing so many of the fresh produce that Europe relies on, the current situation means that fruit and veg are being left on the trees to rot as no labour forces are there to pick the fruit, meaning Europe could within months run out of fresh food, causing absolute panic. So where then does this leave the European Union when it comes to deciding whether a recession will happen, or worse still, a depression? What is safe to assume? That this will more than likely start with a recession, probably lead to a prolonged recession, and then will more than likely lead to a depression should the EU not be able to recover in a timely manner from the impact of the COVID-19 virus.
Is it a recession or a depression? I think it's going to be somewhere in between the two. It's going to be a very prolonged recession in a sense, because you're going to have a big fall in output. It could be 20 to 30% of GDP. I mean, these are astonishing figures.
The one thing that the EU does have on its side is unity of the Union, which will mean the stronger together attitude will prevail. Yet for the poor old British, the outlook appears far from certain, as it floats ever further away from the Union that it now so desperately needs.
The COVID-19 virus is going to cause an inevitable recession, whether we like it or not, with the possibility that could be extended into a depression is something that both governments and the public remain highly nervous about. The EU as a bloc has a tough challenge ahead, yet it has shown in the past that it can survive tough tests. However, the UK may now be left in the dark as they venture it alone following Brexit and pick up the pieces of their shattered economy, which was already crumbling prior to the COVID-19 outbreak. Let us know your thoughts. Follow us on @ED_program and join the conversation. Let us know how you are dealing with the economic downturn. Our Twitter page details on your screens now and also contain a host of interesting viewpoints and tweets, as well as information about what's coming up on future shows. I'm Kavitakwai on behalf of myself and the whole team here in Economic Divide. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.